Welcome to the cockpit. My name's Ryan, and I'll be your pilot today. Boys and girls, we are set for a 4 o'clock game against the division rival Buffalo Bills, but I want to come here, talk to you guys a little bit about a rumor that dropped, kind of the worst kept secret in all of professional sports. Words are hard today this morning. If you're just hopping in, make sure you hit that like button. Love having you guys in here. We're going to talk a little bit about Davante Adams potentially coming to the New York Jets next year via trade. The Jets are expected to pursue the wide receiver, but is it the right move? I want to hear from you guys. I want to get your thoughts on it. There is a poll question in the chat. Which wide receiver do you prefer in the offseason? A trade for Davante Adams, free agent Mike Evans, free agent T. Higgins, or draft/other wide receiver? And then you can comment down below. I'm a little surprised by the results in the poll yet, so I definitely want to see some more votes as this continues to go on. So the tweet from Adam Schefter. Sources around the NFL expect that New York Jets will make another run at pursuing a trade for Davante Adams again this offseason, trying once and for all to pair him with Aaron Rodgers. Now, there were reports in the offseason the Jets tried to make this trade happen, and then there was reports right at the trade deadline that the Jets tried to make moves for both, not both at the same time, but they tried to make moves for Davante Adams, they tried to make moves for T. Higgins, they tried to make moves for Mike Evans. So they're looking for a big-time wide receiver, but how does this actually work if you're looking at Davante Adams? He has 1 year of guaranteed money left on his contract. His option hit at the beginning of this past offseason. It guaranteed his 2023 and 2024 salaries. If he's on another team next year, his contract would be about a $16-17 million contract for next year, no guaranteed money beyond that, and his cap hits for the 2 years following the 2024 campaign are like $35 and $36 million. So in all reality, this would be a trade for 1 season. Aaron Rodgers has 1 more season under contract, but I think what would probably be more likely to happen would be the Jets would make a trade for Davante Adams. They would extend him and at least give it a 2-year window. I think they'd try to keep Adams on the team for the duration that you'd want to have Rodgers there for, and also keep it low enough where it doesn't impact a future Garrett Wilson contract. But now we have to get into, like, what would this compensation look like? He was traded for a haul from the Packers to the Raiders at one point. Could you imagine if the Raiders get hosed twice in 2 decades on elite Hall of Fame wide receivers? They traded a mountain load of picks for Randy Moss back in the day, wound up trading him to the Patriots for like a 4th round pick. And now you have Davante Adams, who they trade and give a monster contract to, only to then flip him 2 years later to another team. Look, I like Davante Adams. I'm all about it. I think he's 31 or about to be 31 this year. There's a lot still left in the tank. I am totally cool with Davante Adams on a 2, even a 3-year contract. I think is enough to be good and elite. I mean, especially if you're telling me Davante Adams is going to be our number 2 wide receiver, get out of town. Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, and Breece Hall lined up in this backfield is absolutely nutty. So what would the Jets have to give up? Right now, the Jets have a 1st-round pick this year. We have a 3rd-round pick this year. We do not have a 2nd-round pick. That's what was traded for Aaron Rodgers at the start of just before the draft this past year. So what would the Jets have to give up? Are there players that the Raiders would consider wanting from the New York Jets? I don't think you'd want to do that because you have a Hall of Fame quarterback and you're trying to go for this, final push. I don't think you want to trade away assets. So you're really looking at draft compensation. There's a few different ways that I think the Jets can get it done. I think a conditional pick in 2025 would be the easiest based on Davante Adams' performance. If he has, let's say, 1,000 yards or a certain amount of touchdowns, then the Jets give up, let's say, a 1st-round pick in 2025. I don't think there's any way the Jets move the 2024 1st-round pick. I think it's far too valuable given what we've already given up for Aaron Rodgers. I don't see us having our 1st pick in the draft being like the 3rd round. Now, maybe there's some sort of weird maneuver of draft picks. Maybe it's going, if the Jets wind up with a top 10 draft pick and the Raiders are sitting somewhere around 17, 18 by the time this thing's all said and done, maybe they want to come up for a quarterback and the Jets decide to slide down, and that trade down nets you Davante Adams, you keep your first round pick. That would be something that I would really want to look at, but I'm hoping we win enough games the rest of this year where the Raiders are picking further in front of us, and this is more of a discussion than just that simple sort of trade down. I do think if the Raiders have a second round pick, and I'd have to look at what their draft picks are. I don't know what their current stock of picks is overall, but I think they still have a second round pick. Maybe it's a situation where they end up with a top 10 pick and they want to trade down with the Jets, and we go from first round to second round. And now the Jets have their second round pick. They've picked up their wide receiver. Now you take your offensive lineman in the second round. Maybe it's a quarterback if you're thinking possibly having someone to sit behind Aaron Rodgers for a little bit. The quarterback question is going to be a fascinating one for me because I don't know what the right move is in terms of drafting one earlier. I don't think it's the same situation as Aaron Rodgers found himself in Green Bay, because Green Bay went up and traded up for Jordan Love and passed on T. Higgins. That's why part of me is thinking like maybe the Jets go after T. Higgins to right the wrong that was supposed to be the wide receiver with Aaron Rodgers. So I don't know. I mean, could it be a situation where the Jets are moving a Bryce Huff in some capacity for an additional pick? I think there's a very high possibility that happens. The Jets have devoted a ton of assets to our defensive line right now, both in draft picks and in financial compensation. Can you afford to pay Bryce Huff $20+ million a year? Or are you going to have to decide, do we just let him walk for a 2025 third round pick? That would be asinine, makes no damn sense. Or do you possibly apply the franchise tag to him and use him as a tradable asset with the intention of probably, like, worst case scenario, having a high priced elite edge rusher on your team for one season? I hope we re-sign him to a longer term deal. I think that would make a lot more sense. But I could see a situation where Bryce Huff could be used as a trade chip to get additional draft compensation or a player in here that we want. I don't know. It's just fascinating to see how this could all shake out. Now, as far as other wide receivers, I like the free agent routes. I'm not going to lie. I'd rather spend Woody's money and the draft money, Woody's money and the salary cap money as opposed to draft compensation. Draft compensation just kind of makes me nervous. You got a 4 or 5 year controllable cheap player. Do you want to give it up for a 31-year-old wide receiver when there's other really good wide receivers also hitting the free agent market? That's where I sort of struggle in a lot of this. Boba Jet comes in and says, remember Garrett Wilson said he plans to change his number next year. Let's go get 13-10. Jets over the Bills. I just want a victory over the Bills. 13-10 would be a snooze fest of a game, but I'll take it all day and twice on Sunday. Now, as far as Garrett Wilson changing his number, Garrett Wilson's going from 17 to 5, which means 17 is available for Davante Adams when he inevitably comes to the New York Jets. I feel like we should just pencil this in right now. Like, there's no other way it's going to go about. The Jets have already tried to make the Packers in New York for the 2023 campaign with Lazard and Cobb, and I really think Bakhtiari is going to wind up in New York as well, which begs the question, are the Jets going to change the field? They just put down new turf this year. Bakhtiari doesn't want to play on turf. Would he come in if Garrett Wilson, who's already been chirping about grass, if Aaron Rodgers, who just tore his Achilles, is thinking about grass, if Bakhtiari is thinking about grass, do they try to make a switch? But 13-10 over the Bills, dude, let's just get a win. Let's just get a win. That's all I'm hoping for here. See a lot of you guys in the chat. Edgar, what's up? Mitt Flair, Aaron, Dakota says, with a healthy Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and Davante Adams, good night. Imagine Davante Adams as your number 2 wide receiver. Silly season. Absolutely nuts. Band says, we need a big Gibson game today. I want to see more and more from Gibson. He's so electric with the ball in his hands. If you could just get more opportunities. The biggest flaw with the Jets offense right now is not getting first downs. You're not getting the opportunity to have more swings. It's like if you're playing baseball and you're like, okay, you get 3 strikes and you're out, but you also get 3 batters. You get 3 outs before you switch sides of the field. With the Jets, it feels like it's swing out, swing out, swing out. It's like 3 pop flies right off the bat. You don't even get anywhere into your You don't deplete their pitcher from his arm perspective. You're not getting further into your lineup. This is how it feels for the Jets. If you can start getting first downs and you get a new reset of, okay, I got 3 opportunities. I've got 3 opportunities. Now you get more and more opportunities to get Gibson the ball, to get, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson the ball. Jets got to convert some first downs here. I'm done with this whole real fast and punt away. Andrew comes in. Andrew says, Aaron is the type of hyper-focus on one receiver, but Lazard has been so bad, so it makes sense because whoever they bracket, Aaron can focus on the other one. So I do think we need another wide receiver, 100%. Davante Adams, if he's got to be number 2, it'd be silly not to like that. T. Carts, what's up, dude? Welcome to the cockpit. Jess B says, would be awesome to get him. Automatically makes the Jets Super Bowl contenders in 2024. I think the Jets were Super Bowl contenders without Davante Adams. You add him to the mix, I mean, they're just going to keep talking about it all offseason. Edward Ziff, love Adams, and he's Rodgers' boy, but I prefer Evans and keep the draft capital. That is definitely where I sort of align myself as well. I really like Davante Adams, and I have no problem bringing him in, but I very much like the size profile of a Mike Evans that could help us in the red zone and be a complementary piece to a slot faster wide receiver in Gibson and your number 1 wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. Like, I feel like Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams are very, very similar. And if you're I still feel like if you bring in a Davante Adams, you still need to find a jump ball type player. Like, I don't see Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams necessarily being that jump ball player as much as they have massive hands and can go up and get a ball. Like, they have ups, but I want like 6'5", like towering type of receiver. That's why I sort of align myself a little more with Mike Evans or T. Higgins. Aaron says, any of the 3 first options would be spectacular. Yeah, you would take any of those in the poll. 100%. Harlan says, how do you know if the Raiders want to trade Adams? Why would the Jets want Adams when the real problem is the offensive line? Because you can fix the offensive line. You can fix the offensive line. You got AVT coming back. Tittman is seemingly good to go for the rest of the season. You got Laken Tomlinson under contract. You're probably using your first-round pick on an offensive lineman if we're all being pretty realistic here. I don't think Becton comes back. And then I think they wind up bringing Bakhtiari in. Unless Becton's willing to sign like a cheaper contract, I like the high upside of Bakhtiari more than I like the financial long-term commitment to a massive contract to Mekhi Becton, because I feel like his injury history and Bakhtiari's injury history are both highly concerning, and I like the one I can get out of faster. I don't trust Mekhi Becton, and I don't think he's worth it to franchise tag anymore. Like, I don't think he's played to a level to deserve $20 million. I would rather franchise tag Bryce Huff and move him for an asset than, franchise tag Becton and let Huff walk for a 3rd-round comp pick. I'd pretty sour. But yeah, offensive line is an issue, but I think you can fix both them. Ban says Rodgers would have 2 number 1 wide receivers. Yes, he would. Anthony says Davante Adams is good enough, but our offensive line is horrible. Joe needs to worry about that, and Joe needs to worry about who his coach is going to be. His coach is going to be Robert Saleh. That's not changing anything. But I do think that offensive line will be a serious point of contention, and it's going to be trying to figure out what your tackle situation is going to be, because we cannot go into the season the same way we did this year. And Mekhi Becton, are you going to pay him a lot of money? I think there's going to be a big issue with, trying to figure out what financial assets you want to devote to that. I do think a rookie first-round tackle is highly likely, but you still set yourself up for this weird position of, okay, every team behind you knows you need an offensive lineman. Are you going to go into the same situation that you ran into this draft, where you traded down from 13 to 15, lost the final tackle, and now you see the repercussions of not having a strong offensive line? I don't want to see that. Anthony D says, I'd rather sign Mike Evans than giving up the picks. Andrew says, Evans doesn't want to leave Tampa Bay, and they want him to retire a buck. They do, but he was just asking if he could get a contract similar to a Cooper Kupp, which I believe is like close to $30 million a year. I think it's like $27+ million a year. So that tells me he's either going to rake the Bucks over the coals to end his career as a Buck, or he's looking to try and win a championship somewhere else. I could see it going either way. Now, he was in Florham Park for training camp this past offseason with the New York Jets, so he could at least have some sort of a vibe as to what's going on. I think if he were to leave Tampa Bay, there is a high likelihood he would go to the Jets. But I would say Jets and Bucks are the two most likely landing spots for him. I don't think it's dead set that he's going to wind up being a Buck. It depends if he cares more about money or more about winning. And he has foregone a lot of money over the course of his career to try and win championships, which he already has. So I could definitely see a situation where he just goes for the money. The dude says, I'd rather have Keon Coleman out of FSU or an offensive lineman than Davante Adams. I don't think you're going to have it. I don't think you're going to have to give up a first round pick for Davante. I don't think you have to give up the 2024 first. So I do think you can have more. You can have both. You can have both options. Jess P says Marvin Harrison Jr. would be a good substitute if the Jets can't get Adams, but Harrison might be gone sooner in the draft. Harrison's going to be probably the first player not a quarterback taken. Like, you're talking probably fourth overall pick at worst. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to fall to the Jets. Mothman Evolved says franchise tag him. Huff is not going anywhere. I do think the Jets are going to have to franchise tag Huff, and then you just get to the odd question of, do you let him play as a Jet for another year on the franchise tag, or do you trade him now? Or maybe you let him play on the franchise tag and you trade him after next season. But I do think the Jets have a lot of assets tied up in the defensive line, and it's going to make it very, very difficult to retain our elite edge rusher in Bryce Huff. I do not want to see him go, but I do think there is a high likelihood he winds up getting moved either this year or next year. Aaron says T. Higgins would be dope. I really like T. Higgins. He's younger. You're going to have to make a bigger financial commitment to him in terms of years, which could impact a future Garrett Wilson contract. I think that's the only thing you might have to be a little concerned about, but I think he has the most upside of any of the players here. Mitt Flair says he would rather Mike Evans. The dude says Aaron Rodgers says jump. Joe Douglas says how high. Yes, I agree. I think there's a lot of moves made because Rodgers wants them to be made, and I think you have to be very careful as to what you do. You already have the quarterback under contract. I don't think you necessarily have to jump through every single hoop to make him happy. I think if you told him, hey, we couldn't get a trade done with the Raiders and we got you Mike Evans, I don't think he's going to be upset, because it takes two to tango, and if the Raiders are playing hardball, you can't just expect the Jets to give up everything they can. So Joe Douglas needs to be able to stand strong and be able to have a conversation with Aaron and not feel like he has to do every move Aaron wants. Pure Adrenaline Sports says, is Izzy active today? I don't know. I did not see the active-inactive list, but I would imagine now that you've cut Michael Carter, he would have to be. I would hope so, at least. You're expecting more carries out of Breece Hall, out of Dalvin Cook. It was about a 15% share. So if you give 5% to each of those guys, then maybe you have a 5% share to Izzy. Just get him a few reps. Just get him a few touches. Wet our palate a little bit. That's what I want to see. Benny Bronx says, I simulated a Jets versus Bills game on Madden 24, and the result was 23-21 Jets win, and Zach actually connected for a 20-yard touchdown to Breece Hall. Now, is it a 20-yard touchdown through the air, or is it a 3-yard pass that goes 20 yards to Breece Hall? Because I can believe the second one more than I can believe the first one, but I just want to see some points. Give me a touchdown drive. I don't want to, like, as much as I want just points to win a game, I very much want to feel more confident going into the back half of this season with Zach leading us on a touchdown drive. Like, I want to see some good play calls. I want to see some good catches. I want to see no penalties. Just a clean drive. Clean drive the whole way. Harlan says, Jets always seem to win the offseason. Then when it comes to playing during the regular season, they never seem to make it. I would argue if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, the Jets are just fine right now. I don't think you can. It's one thing when you make some bad moves, like a Le'Veon Bell signing, like a Tremaine Johnson signing, like a, at the time, a CJ Mosley signing, and then those contracts look bad while they're on the field. That's the difference. Aaron Rodgers never got to really see the field for the New York Jets. So we could have won last offseason, but it's not because they were bad players. It's because we got screwed week one. And I think Davante Adams falls into that same category. I don't think you're concerned about bringing in Davante Adams, especially when you know his relationship with Aaron Rodgers, with Nathaniel Hackett. It just seems to make a whole lot of sense. Andrew says, double team Garrett and Keon Breece if we had two legit number twos like Miami does, or if we had a legit number two like Miami does, we'd be putting up points. Lazard ain't it. He can't get any separation and drops the ball more often than not. So the issue so much with Lazard, yes, the penalties, yes, the drop passes, but the separation I'm really not as concerned about. It's more so his lack of fighting for the ball, which makes his lack of separation more of an issue. I think it is Zach's inaccuracy with the ball in terms of getting it into a tighter window. There's plenty of receivers that get around the same separation as Lazard that are really good. DeAndre Hopkins. I want to say T. Higgins was in that group, and I think DK Metcalf. I think those were the three names that were like standing out in that separation chart, but they have better better quarterback, better ball placement. But yeah, a better receiver that can get open makes it easier for everyone. Boba Jet says Keon Coleman is 6'4". I think the Jets could absolutely draft a wide receiver in the first round. Could you imagine if they like go out, they make a trade for Davante, and they add a massive wide receiver? I don't know how you fix offensive line. Like, to me, it would be sacrilegious to draft a wide receiver in the first round when you can make a trade for Davante Adams or bring in a Mike Evans or T. Higgins in free agency, and you don't address the offensive line, especially if Becton ends up walking. I would probably lose my mind. Marcelo says, our wide receiver core is almost as bad as our offensive line group. Look, if wide receiver shouldn't be the issue, it is right now. For me, I'm looking at the Jets offensive line, and it's not being able to hold their blocks where you can get some guys open further downfield. It's a little bit of Zach Wilson. I think the play calling is suspect. When you have an incomplete pass on first down, you could almost guarantee you're going to have a run right up the gut with Breece Hall for like 2 yards, and now you're in 3rd and 8. I feel like you could just see it coming a million miles away. So I think it's more than just wide receiver and offensive line group. I think it's a cumulative thing, and it's really going to take Rodgers coming back for us to feel any kind of confidence in this team. Kelvin comes in, says, just want to say good morning. As a Jets fan, I'm grateful that every game feels like a playoff game, even in the regular season. That is a depressing way to look at this. Yes, every game is a must-win if you're the New York Jets because you can't afford to have any comfort. John says Joe will sign off-season signing. Joe will sign off-season signing. That is what we need to sign is offensive tackle. Davante will come here and restructure and make it more team-friendly to play his last couple of years with Rodgers. His contract's already team-friendly. If the Jets trade for him, it's a 1-year, $17 million deal, which I would take Davante Adams for $17 million all damn day. I do think that you would extend him. I think the Jets are going to try and work most contracts on a 2-year window. I think they're going to plan on Rodgers this year and then have the holdovers like a Davante Adams or whatever players you decide to bring in. I think it's going to be a 2-year contract. I do think the Jets wind up adding a quarterback in some capacity in the draft, and then you at least get that quarterback to sit behind Rodgers for 1 year in the event that you have to hit like the eject button. And like Rodgers, is done at the end of the season. Maybe the health isn't there. Maybe we win a Super Bowl and he's out. At least you have a young quarterback that got to learn behind him. I don't think Zach's going to be on the roster. But I do think they wind up structuring this offseason to be a 2-year type of window. Mothman says, if I want Adams, if Patriots or Dolphins got him, everyone will cry about it. So why wait till that happens and take chances? Rodgers has 2 years left. Rodgers has 2 years left, I do believe we got the 2-year window. But look, I don't see how Davante Adams is so much better than Mike Evans or so much better than a T. Higgins. Like, I'd be happy with any one of those three. I think there's a lot of options. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into Davante Adams unless you get yourself a pretty reasonable deal. Like, if the Patriots want to give up, they're not going to give up their first-round pick, but let's say they give up, like, a top second-round pick where the Jets would then have to give up a first-round pick. I don't want to give up the 2024 pick for Davante Adams. I really don't. AZ says, my top choice is T. Higgins, which I know isn't the consensus. That's honestly my top choice. Would be awesome. I think he is the best wide receiver that you could possibly bring in here. I think Mike Evans, from a contract length perspective, fits nicer, but I do like T. Higgins a lot. Q says, David Bakhtiari played in 1 game in 2 of the last 3 years and hasn't played a whole year since 2019. Can't bring him in and hope he stays healthy. I think you're looking at him and Mekhi Becton in a similar light. And I think unless Becton is willing to take the contract that I think Bakhtiari would be willing to take to try and come back with Rodgers, to try and win a ring, and like the risk that his injury history is not necessarily that different from the injury history of Mekhi Becton. Like, signing Mekhi Becton to a big deal or signing Bakhtiari to a lower end deal because of his injury history. I'll take the Bakhtiari deal, who could wind up playing like a top 5 tackle, versus Becton, who's playing like not that great. I mean, like, of course, I love that I see him on the field and I want him to be here for a while, but I am not interested in paying Mekhi Becton $20 million on a franchise tag. He has not earned that level of play. And I think Bryce Huff is a more valuable asset for the New York Jets than anything that Mekhi Becton's currently doing right now. John Holden. John says, I think we get Davante Adams for a 2025 third rounder. They need to dump his contract so we actually have the leverage. No, they don't need to dump his contract. They're already paying him. Like, his contract's already guaranteed for $17 million next year. They are going to cut him after the 2024 season, though, the Raiders would. They're not going to keep him under contract for $36 million the year after that. And that dead cap hit is already going to hit. So they don't really have to move him, but if they want to get anything of value for him before he walks, they're going to have to either trade him in the offseason or trade him at the trade deadline. Like, I could see a situation where this kind of like sits and waits a little bit, and they're like, oh, well, it didn't work out. Now we'll trade Davante Adams, and the Jets will make this push towards the playoffs at the trade deadline. And then we're all talking about it for 2 years of Davante Adams trade, unless the Raiders really want their draft pick this year. It depends what the Jets are willing to offer. Chuck Lagana said, did the Jets get Robbie Anderson? I have not seen it. I don't think any team put a claim in, so he's probably back on Miami's practice squad if I had to guess. Complete Lawn Care says, and there lies the problem. Joe Douglas letting Aaron Rodgers run this franchise. I think it's a big problem. I don't think the players that we brought in to get Aaron Rodgers here is a big problem. I feel like that's the price of getting an Aaron Rodgers to New York. So I'm not overly concerned about that necessarily. But I am concerned about a very clear situation where you have Davante Adams, who would very much be an Aaron Rodgers player that he would want to bring in. You cannot overpay for Davante Adams. I don't want to. If they give up the 2024 draft, like 2024 first round pick for Davante Adams, I'm going to be very upset because there is a lot of good quality wide receivers that you could have at, a fraction of that cost. I do not under any circumstances want to give up a first round pick in 2024 for Davante Adams. You can convince me on a conditional pick in 2025, but now you're talking about giving up a first round pick for what will eventually be like a 31 or 32 year wide receiver. John also comes in and says, do not forget Corey Davis will return after Thanksgiving also. The longer we get into the season and the less likelihood the Jets have of getting into the playoffs, the less likely I feel that Corey Davis is coming back. I feel like that's probably a long shot to begin with anyway. The rumors that I saw seem to be just that. Tuda Money says, everyone, fire everyone. LOL, don't let this news distract you from the garbage this season. You can't fire everyone after losing Rodgers for the season. I'm sorry. That's not something I'm standing behind. Steve is real. Yeah. Says, I saw a stupid rumor where the Packers and Jets are going to make a trade between Bakhtiari and Garrett Wilson. That will never happen, but I do believe Bakhtiari will be a Jet next year, not a trade. I completely agree. There's no way you trade Garrett Wilson for anyone. I don't think there's a single player in this league right now based on the construction of our current roster. Obviously, we've got Aaron Rodgers. If you were saying like, hey, you can get Patrick Mahomes for Garrett Wilson, then sure. But there's no receiver that I'm bringing in that's going to outplay Garrett Wilson as wide receiver 2. Oh, as that person being wide receiver 2 and Garrett being wide receiver 1. Bakhtiari, Jets are not going to make a trade for him. I do think he's going to get cut. He's got a $40 million cap hit for the Packers this offseason. He has not played a lot the last few years. The one thing I'm not entirely sure of is the $20 million that he's owed. If he winds up coming to the Jets via getting released, do the Packers fall on the hook for some of that money? And would it offset with some of our finances? Because then maybe you can pay him a lot less and the Packers are on the hook for a little bit of it. I think that only plays out with guaranteed money, though. And Bakhtiari is probably done at that point. Ant Jet says, good point, Ryan. Maybe you should just have a center, some backs, and the rest wide receivers. No, I want offensive linemen. And I want to tackle in the first round, or the best offensive lineman you could possibly get. If it's an interior offensive lineman, then at least it gives you some flexibility with Tittman and whether it's a center or a guard. Laken Tomlinson's only got one more year left, so getting the offensive line right is an absolute must. Eddie says Bears going to draft Marvin Harrison Jr., trade for Mooney. Mooney's going to be a free agent after the year. That's another one of the wide receivers that I really like that I think the Jets should look at. Darnell Mooney, Hollywood Brown. There's going to be a lot. Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati, even if you don't want to go after T. Higgins, there's a lot of good wide receivers. If you give up a 2024 first for Davante Adams, I'm going to be so mad. I'm gonna flip a shit if that's what winds up happening. Dakota says Josh Allen's last 3 games against the Jets, 5.8 yards per attempt, 5 interceptions, 1 lost fumble, 2 passing touchdowns, 198 passing yards per game, 3 rushing touchdowns, sacked a total of 13 times. We need Josh Allen to play hero ball. Richard says, do not re-sign Mekhi Becton. Once he gets his money, he will be injured all the time. I do not want to commit to Mekhi Becton for a long-term deal, and I think the $20 million that you'd have to tag him with is far more money than I think he's worth right now, given the caliber of play you're getting from him. I 100% would prefer to tag Bryce Huff and either keep him on the franchise tag or use him to get another asset and then figure out offensive line outside of Mekhi Becton. If Becton wants to come back on a reasonable contract where he can sign for 3 years or be a part of a Super Bowl team for 2 years or whatever you want to call it, that's fine with me. But he has not earned the franchise tag, in my opinion. Private says, what about the receiver from Missouri? I have to actually go and do my draft research. We're going to start doing some of the college game streams at this point because we can start targeting some of these elite players that could be available for the New York Jets, but we haven't just watched enough of it. I don't want to just watch highlights. So watching the NCAA playoffs and some of the bowl games is a lot of fun because you're able to diagnose these good players against other good teams, even though it's not necessarily an NFL caliber defense. So we'll keep an eye out on all this stuff. He says, let's draft an offensive lineman in the first, then creep back up for Jaden early second. So I really want Jaden Daniels. I would love to find a way to get Jaden Daniels. But I think it requires the trading of Bryce Huff to make that work. Ant Jets says, continuity is paramount with the short window. So you're saying we got to get Davante Adams as a priority instead of going after someone like a Mike Evans or a T. Higgins who you'd have to have some level of gelling period with. I can understand that. Richard says, way many other GMs to make these decisions. Douglas moves are historically bad. I don't know if historically bad. 2 second-round picks for Aaron Rodgers is a pretty solid trade. Toxic says, pick swap this year's first so they can come up and draft a quarterback and they give us Adams. Toxic, see, I see you've been paying attention to what I'm either tweeting out, what I'm sending out. Right now, the difference in pick, the Jets are sitting at the 12th pick. The Raiders are sitting at pick 16. That's a difference of 200 points. That's about the equivalent of a third-round pick right now. So it kind of depends how the rest of the season plays out. If the Raiders go on a little bit of a run, they want to come up for a quarterback because they're in the mid to late teens, and the Jets wind up with a top 10 pick. You consider it, I guess. I really want the offensive lineman, so it depends how that gets done. I would rather draft the offensive lineman and bring in a free agent wide receiver than have to rely on moving our draft compensation for Davante Adams. Yuda Wazoo says, please take Bakhtiari. Useless on the Packers. In fact, he has been a net negative for the Packers due to his fragility. You take him. Oh, I completely agree. He's been a liability for you guys. And I think the Jets would have to structure a contract in such a way that he would not be a liability from an injury standpoint for the Jets. I'm cool with sacrificing a roster spot for the caliber that is Bakhtiari's play, as long as the contract is structured in such a way that you're able to benefit from him getting injured. Like, I don't want to pay him to not play, but I would pay him a premium if he's on the field. Structure it that way, and I'm happy. Anthony D says, Ryan, how could Aaron Rodgers running the Jets be a big problem? How many years prior to Rodgers did Joe Douglas get to solve the offensive line? How many top 3 quarterbacks has he had come on? How could Aaron Rodgers running the Jets be a big... It's not a big problem. Oh, I see what you're saying. How could Aaron Rodgers being like GM of the Jets be a big problem? I don't think it is, but I think you have to look at Mike Evans and T. Higgins and some of the other options and see what that value is for them and the contract they would command and what Davante Adams would command in a trade. Like, if the Raiders are saying, hey, we'll take your 3rd-round pick this year, get it done. Just do it. It's fine. No issues whatsoever. I would have spent a 3rd-round pick on a wide receiver anyway, So move it for Davante Adams. If you want to tie it to some conditional pick in 2025, I'm okay with that as well. My only hang up on Davante Adams, you can't give up a first-round pick for him. Not the 2024 pick. You need it for the offensive line. And if that's what Rodgers is pushing for, which I don't think he will, I think looking at this offensive line, he's probably going to be pretty realistic on it. But I'm just concerned where Douglas tries to move mountains to get Davante Adams, and I think that would be a bad move. Steve says, anything that involves Rodgers is a problem. I know this firsthand. I know, a little salty Packer fan. It's okay. We want you guys to be able to cheer for us next year. I like the Packers fans coming in. You guys also provide a different level of insight than us Jets fans have currently. John says, Davante Adams looked slow against the Jets. Garrett Wilson is our Davante Adams. Jets need to go out and grab a different, younger receiver to complement Wilson. That's why I'm on T. Higgins. And then at least Mike Evans gives you the size profile. So even if his speed diminishes, he's still going to have that height. JT says, Adams, Higgins, Evans would be my priority. Okay. That's okay. I approve of that. Anthony D says, if this team flatlines the rest of the year, it's hard to make a justification to bring either a general manager or coach back. No, I'm sorry. They're both going to stay here for the Rodgers experiment. They're not going to be moved off of. I think it would be a bad look for the Jets to can their coaches after losing the quarterback that helped them, that they helped attract here. I think that would be a bad look. Mothman says, we lost 2 winnable games back-to-back weeks. We have an incompetent offense and a mediocre quarterback. If you have Aaron Rodgers, I don't think we lose a lot of these games. Tim Burns, do I think Garrett Wilson would give up number 17 for Davante? Yes, because he's switching back to his college number 5 anyway next year, so 17 is going to be open. T Money says, you can fire JD. He had a chance to get Dobbs. Him alone wins us 3 more games. That's part of the conversation, right? Like, was there a reason the Jets didn't make the trade for another quarterback? I heard 2 different rumors. I heard one, the financial side of it, the Jets had already exhausted a ton of cash this year because of the contracts they give up, not salary cap space, the cash paid out. If they paid out a ton to Adams, a ton to Rodgers, a ton to Quinnen, a ton to our free agents, then I heard like $280 million is what was paid out this year, which is bonkers. That is a lot of cash. I also heard that the Jets didn't make a trade because they wanted Aaron Rodgers to be able to come back at some point this season, and they were going to make a push for that. I don't know. I do think Douglas should have made a move for a quarterback. Kelvin says, Evans, 2-year deal, can address other needs with draft picks and won a Super Bowl, which brings veteran leadership in the playoffs. I don't want to have to rely too heavily on our draft picks. I want to rely on the current team and be complemented by our draft picks. Sandman says, I'd rather have Mike Evans or T. Higgins and focus on our offensive line. Our offensive line is more of a concern than finding a wide receiver number 2. I'm not giving up capital for Davante Adams. I'm not giving up a first-round pick for him. I think first-round pick is the part that I'm hung up on. T-Money says, how the F do you trot Zach Wilson out there week after week and say with a straight face he gives us the best chance to win? Because he gives us the best chance to win of the quarterbacks on our roster, because Douglas did not go out and get a more competent wide receiver or quarterback. Sucks. Really sucks. And I think whoever's to blame for it should have to answer for it. And I don't know if it's Douglas or if Douglas is being told that by someone else. Pure Adrenaline Sports. According to Over the Cap, Becton playing at a $6.5 million valuation. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. He's not playing well this year. He is not worth the franchise tag. I'm cool with extending him. You want to give him a 3-year, $30 million contract and then give it like incentives based on level of play? I'm down with that. I'm down with keeping Becton on a reasonable contract. But he's slapping his knee saying, pay me, that sort of stuff. He has not earned that level of payday. He can go somewhere else for that kind of money. Could you imagine getting a comp pick for Mekhi Becton? Like, we allow Mekhi Becton to walk and we get a comp 3rd-round pick for him because someone else believes in him and then he winds up getting hurt somewhere else. But at least we have the draft pick. I'll take that. Private says, check out Luther Burden, wide receiver from Missouri. He's a diamond. I would take that. I would take a look at that. Anthony D says, yes, Ryan Rodgers gave back $35 million. You better he's Joe's boss. Oh, better believe he's Joe's boss. Yeah, well, that's why I don't have an issue with the Lazard contract, the Dalvin Cook contract, the Cobb contract. That was the cost of getting Aaron Rodgers here. I'm not upset with those. Do they sting a little bit? Yeah, like if you told me I get all those players and Nathaniel Hackett as our OC, but you don't get Aaron Rodgers, yeah, I don't think any of us are signing up for that. John says, imagine our team having an exciting offense. The last damn time I've had that was Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. I thought this was the year we were getting that, John. I really did. Crushed. Eddie says, imagine Fields going on a tear to end the year. What kind of haul will they get for the number 1 pick again? I don't think they're trading out. I think they're going to take Caleb Williams or Drake May, whichever quarterback suits them with that Panthers pick, number 1 overall. And I would trade Justin Fields. And I guess it depends on where your other pick is too. But I would think it depends what you can get value-wise. Like you could probably get a haul for the first overall pick, but do you want to forego that quarterback? Like, do you see Justin Fields as the quarterback that the previous regime drafted as your franchise quarterback? If they do, they've got a haul that they could trade down from. I get the feeling they're going to make a new selection, though. Private says, honestly, we've been waiting for Becton to stay healthy, and he's trending in that direction. I think he'll will negotiate a nice contract to keep Becton. As long as he's willing to sign a reasonable deal, I do not want to use the franchise tag on Mekhi Becton. I do not think he's worth it. Douglas, he says, how Dobbs is playing on the Vikings isn't necessarily how he'd be playing on the Jets. Not as simple as plug and play. I completely agree. I think our offensive line is drastically different than the Vikings offensive line. The Vikings might have the best offensive line in football. You look at what Dalvin Cook did there last year. His yards over expected were one of the worst in the NFL for running backs, and he still had 1,100 yards or 1,200 yards total between rushing and receiving. For me, the Jets' offensive line is more of an issue, and the Vikings' production is more of a product of a really good offensive line. So I don't think Dobbs has the same level of success, but I do think Dobbs is a very, very smart player and would have far more success than Zach Wilson is currently having in our offensive system. But I do think that Nathaniel Hackett tends to be the weak link in our system right now. Edward Ziff says, love Rodgers, but he's not a GM. It's JD's decisions. I do agree. And JD needs to be able to make the right moves for the Jets, not just the right moves for Rodgers. Jay Slimy says, don't be surprised if we draft a quarterback in the first round. I would be surprised if we drafted one with our singular pick in the first round. If you move Bryce Huff and you get a late first round pick and you want to take a quarterback after you've secured an offensive lineman, I'm totally cool with that. I'm all right with moving on from a Bryce Huff to select a future quarterback. Like, if that's the value you get from what you've gotten out of an undrafted free agent in Huff, I can live with it. I want to see him as our long-term edge rusher. Like, honestly, if you could go back and redo it, you don't draft Will McDonald, who I think is going to be a good player, but you don't draft Will McDonald. You take Jackson Smith-Njigba. You don't worry about your wide receivers. And then you get the offensive lineman this year, and you get the quarterback, and then you figure it all out. But I don't think it would be wise for the Jets to roll into potentially the last year of Aaron Rodgers with an expiring contract Zach on the roster and expect Zach to make these big leaps in year 4 under Rodgers. I would rather have a 4 or 5 year option at quarterback with the ability to allow Rodgers to go an additional year. Now, maybe they say, hey, we're rolling with Zach, and if Rodgers retires and Zach's not the guy, we're going to draft a quarterback next year, and then you're back in the same wash, rinse, repeat situation. I think it's very tough for a top drafted quarterback to do the right stuff in New York in terms of not get the media on his case and, not let the outside noise come in. If you sit behind Rodgers for a year or two, then there's less pressure on that quarterback. Like Jordan Love, I love that he got to sit behind Rodgers. Now, he's not really a good quarterback, so it's a bad draft pick. But, man, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised with the quarterback, but I think you got to make some moves happen in order for that to come to fruition. Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix are the 3 quarterbacks right now, with my pretty amateur evaluation of what I've seen so far as the quarterbacks I would like to keep an eye on, because end of the first round, top of the second, I think there's going to be more quarterbacks at the top of the second round than you'll see at the top of the first. Like, I think Caleb Williams and Drake May are going to be 1-2. I think Penix probably goes middle of the first round. I think Jaden Daniels might go tail end of the first round. But then you're talking Bo Nix and some of those other guys there. Anthony D says, Ryan, you're a bit too soggy on Joe. He's done a mediocre job at best. Overall, records matter. I do tend to lean more in favor of Joe Douglas and how he's built this roster, because I've seen where we've come from. I think Joe Douglas's roster building is significantly better than anything I've seen as a Jets GM or come through as a Jets GM. I think his drafting has left some to be desired. Like, his first draft class has been atrocious. I mean, Bryce Hall and Ashton Davis are like the two sort of saving that draft class from being a complete abomination, but they were later round picks and they're like very, very like, tiny pieces here. Braden Mann cost us Trevor Lawrence. Mekhi Becton's only played 2 years. Yeah, it's brutal. As Soaks says, I saw New York Jets score a touchdown once. A long time ago. Scuba STV says, honestly, why don't we take more time to build an offensive line? I love the flashy move to get a wide receiver, but the line seems like a larger issue. It does, but we've spent a lot of assets on the offensive line, and you have to start hitting on them, like, even if they're not first-round picks. There are plenty of offensive lines around the league that are having far more success. Oh, Rappaport tweet. What's going on with a Rappaport tweet? Let's see what's going on. Rappaport. All right. What are you guys talking about? Ooh, okay. So this from Ian Rappaport. Quarterback Aaron Rodgers eyes a December return, with Week 16 being the most likely spot if the Jets are alive and he can protect himself. Meanwhile, the Bills debut a new offensive coordinator today. So they're going to have Joe Brady, former Saints offensive wide receiver consultant, coach, whatever. And he's going to be the play caller. Now, I would look for big wide receiver day from Stefon Diggs in terms of Joe Brady. He's had a lot of success with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas down in New Orleans. Lots of receivers having some success under him, so maybe a shakeup. But yeah, Rappaport. Let's see. I guess I'll. So he's eyeing Week 16. Week 16, that is the game against the Commanders, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Jets schedule. Let's take a look at it real quick. So if Rodgers is eyeing the Week 16 return, yes, it would be after the Dolphins. It would be the Commanders, then a short week against the Browns, and then against New England. And this would be a home game where he's debuted in front of the fans again with Washington on Christmas Eve. That would be the Christmas gift that Jet fans would be tickled pink about. But now you're talking, there's 5 games. So Buffalo, Miami, Atlanta, Houston, and Miami. No, it's 6 games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's 5 games. Sorry. Buffalo, Miami, Atlanta, Houston, Miami. These next 2 games are so incredibly critical. You lose this game, forget Aaron Rodgers coming back. I don't think you can lose to the Bills and have a realistic expectation that he's going to be coming back. Like, maybe you catch the Dolphins sleeping after they beat the Raiders this week on a short week, and they got to travel. I don't know. Black Friday's got me nervous. But if that looks like where we're headed with Aaron Rodgers, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Let's see. What else you guys talking about in here? Brian says, can't draft an offensive lineman and have expectations of him being a beast. What happened with Becton? Give up the first-round pick, get Adams back, and Aaron can go all in the offseason. Lineman signings. No, get out of here, Brian. I'm not trading a first-round pick for a 31-year-old wide receiver when Mike Evans and T. Higgins are both free agent options. What offensive linemen are you bringing in free agency? Tell me that. Tell me what free agent offensive lineman you're bringing in. Because I've already said Bakhtiari, and I think that's highly likely. But where else are you going? You getting Brown from the Patriots, maybe? Left tackle, right tackle? Maybe he wants to come down here. I think he's going to get paid a pretty handsome penny. I don't know. Judge says drafting a quarterback would be a waste of a pick. Need offensive linemen. Also keep Zach. He is worth improving with a terrible supporting cast. Dude, I don't know. We've seen 3. This will be a full 3 years with Zach. I got a hard time leaning on him going into the final year of his deal with potentially the last year of Rodgers. I don't know, man. I don't know. Edward Ziff says sign Huff and trade Will McDonald. I wish it were that easy. That would be my preferred route, but we've already paid McDonald his signing bonus. So it would be you'd have to get like a first round pick to justify Will McDonald being traded. And I don't think he's worth that right now. Like, I don't think him on a 4-year contract is worth a first round pick because I didn't really think he was worth the 15th overall pick when we drafted him. So would you be willing to sell McDonald at a loss to sign Bryce Huff for a premium? I think it's worth considering, but man, that's rough. I do want Huff here. I mean, he's so young and he's so good. I don't feel like you should let elite players ever leave. Blitzcrew comes in and says, JD and Salah have not been perfect, but the culture change they generated has changed the organization for the better. Yes, I think you just got to get rid of Nathaniel Hackett and Zach at some point, or I don't know. There's a culture here for sure, but there's a culture that you need to get into the next phase, like the next development of what it's going to ultimately be for the future. Does Zach stay on as the backup because he's been in the offense and you're like, oh, well, at least he knows it and Rodgers is here now, and I don't know. I like JD and Salah, but I think they're tied to Rodgers. If you don't have success with Rodgers, they're probably both gone. Tim Burns says, all I want for Christmas is Aaron Rodgers to come back. Dude, it's all we want for Christmas. NYY says, Rodgers coming back will improve Lazard and Hackett's play, but no matter the quarterback, the offensive line stays the same. Will you still get AVT back? I'm curious to see if they would contemplate bringing back a McGovern like dirt cheap, because I didn't think he played poorly this year. I just think that we had a bad quarterback that probably hurt that. Or does Tittman supplant himself as the center? Do you need to find another guard? I think you got to bring in 2 offensive linemen this offseason. You got to draft the top one in the first round. You bring in like a Bakhtiari. If you can retain Becton on a cheaper deal, I'm cool with that. I just don't think you should be paying Becton a crazy ton of money. Mothman says, today is a must win. If we could win, or if we could have won just one of those games from the last 2 weeks, we could have been in a better position. Yes. The Chargers game and Raiders games were must wins, and we fucked it up. Shadow says, Rodgers has too much pull on this team. Enough of this crap. You are the fools paying for this product year after year. I do agree to some extent. Like, we've got Rodgers under contract. I don't think you should force a trade for Davante Adams. I think if you can get him for a 3rd-round pick or some type of conditional pick in 2025, that's the route I would go. If you give up the 2024 first for Davante Adams, I would be upset. I would not be a fan of that move. TJ says, not a fan of this move. He should recover till next season. Where does this tie into the loss of pick to Green Bay? So Rodgers still has to play 65% of the snaps. And if he's returning week 16, even if he plays every snap from then through the Super Bowl, which I don't even think the playoffs are included in that snap percentage, I don't think there's any way for the Packers to get a 1st-round pick. I think they're locked into the number 2. We just have the 1st and 2nd-round picks tied into escrow right now. Ed the Red says, looking forward to seeing Izzy tonight. You and me both, brother. You and me both. John says, the Green Bay lineman gets hurt. Don't want him. Yes, I understand that, and I think a lot of people are going to understand that, but as much as I understand where you guys are saying this, I really think he's coming in. I would be stunned if we did not have David Bakhtiari on our roster next year. You could say it's the worst move, you could say it's the best move, you could say whatever. I'm just telling you what I think is actually going to happen. I'm usually pretty decent at moving chess pieces around. Look at my Bleacher Report stream from back in March. while Carr was still an option, while Rodgers was still in uncertainty, I called almost every move. I called the Jets getting Bakhtiari as well in the offseason. We didn't get him, but I do think he ends up a Jet next year. Sky's the limit. Our resident Dolphin fan comes in and says, Lazard would be great if Rodgers was the quarterback. I think he would at least be better. Lazard, for me, the penalties have been a big issue. The drops have been a big issue, but I think some of the drops do fall on Zach and the way that he throws the ball. There is a large... I think there is a lot of wide receivers that would deem a Zach Wilson pass hard to catch. And that's kind of what Garrett Wilson was saying when he got to catch passes from Rodgers. It was like, wow, he throws a very catchable ball. You're not getting the hospital balls that Zach's throwing up right now. Zach's getting Garrett and Brees crushed across the middle. Garrett Wilson and Brees, for the love of God, do not get hurt for this team this year. Do not get hurt. The dude says, how'd they change the culture when there's a bunch of losing going on in players-only meetings? I'm not concerned about the players-only meeting because I don't know how much of drops and on-field penalties are on the coaches. There has to be some degree of personal responsibility for lapses in judgment. And look, I understand the coach has to keep everyone focused, but you cannot blame Salah for Lazard holding penalty, for a Mekhi Becton false start, or I feel like you can't hold him totally accountable for that. 12 years says we have a culture of great defense, terrible offense. It's a culture push that adds up to losing. You have to figure out the offensive side of the ball. Steve says AVT is injury prone, cannot count on him. Are you telling me you're not going to exercise AVT's fifth-year option this offseason? You're going to roll into next season? I don't deem the Achilles or a triceps tear as reoccurring injuries. Like that, it's not like Mekhi Becton where you had 2 knee injuries in a row. Like, I'm relying on AVT to be a starter next year. You drafted him, you traded up in the first round to get him. He plays elite when he's on the field. Maybe you deem some of the injury was part of moving to tackle, but I think you 100% have to rely on AVT and at least have a backup in place, like a Tittman that can slide over, or like a McGovern. Maybe McGovern's the backup guard next year. I'm okay with that. You have to be too deep across the offensive line. You can't allow injuries to derail your season next year. C. Stewart says, I think Douglas and Salah are tied to Zach, and that could be their downfall. I think there's a very high likelihood that they are. Now, if you have success with Rodgers, I would give Douglas another crack at drafting a quarterback. I would. I would like to see this team rid itself of Zach and see what this coaching staff and this GM can do without him. I do think there's more issues than just Zach. And I don't want to sound like I'm a Zach hater by any means, but the pick of Zach Wilson and not trading down, the issue with like the whole Zach pick, none of the quarterbacks in that draft wound up being worth their draft selection. And if you traded down with the 49ers and punted on the quarterback for a season, you'd have to then go out and make a trade for a quarterback because you're not drafting a quarterback in 2022 when Kenny Pickett was the top quarterback. Would you honestly sit here and tell me today that you would prefer Kenny Pickett over Zach Wilson at quarterback? I wouldn't want either. I think Kenny Pickett's worse. Dude, I don't know. I get frustrated with this stuff. Mumtaz says, we have to get wide receiver for Rodgers, and Adams is his ex-buddy. I still don't get why Davante didn't take Packers money. That would be my only concern. We will lose our first-round pick. Next year is Super Bowl or bust. I don't want to give up the first. I'm not giving up the first for Davante Adams. I'm slamming my hands on the table. I am not giving up a first for Davante Adams. Not 2024 first. You need it for a lineman. I'm going to stand pat and piss and moan about this. But as far as Adams wanting to leave Green Bay, Rodgers had not committed at the time of the contract being offered to Davante to staying in Green Bay. So it'd be no different than Aaron going to Denver and Davante being stuck in Green Bay with Jordan Love, because I'm sure he didn't want Jordan Love. He saw an opportunity to play with his former buddy Derek Carr down in Vegas. He's an Oakland Raider fan, from what I understand. Davante Adams is. So there was a lot of things that fell into place for Davante Adams to go play with Derek Carr in Vegas. They just had Josh McDaniels, who decided to rip everything apart and let Derek Carr leave. And now Davante Adams pissed off. I'm not saying it's the wrong decision necessarily to move on from a Derek Carr, but I think when you fleece a wide receiver into coming there, and now you're basically holding him captive with bad quarterback play in a really tough division. Like, it sucks. I feel like Davante Adams got hoodwinked, and maybe giving back some of his money this year could have facilitated a trade, but at that point, you kind of hope you take the Raiders for all they're worth. So, I don't know. Bearded VTR says, gotta use the games we have left to evaluate Zach and see if he is worth keeping or drafting this year. The next few games will be huge in what we decide to do in the draft. Yes. Sorry. Man, coming down with a cold. Yeah. So I think they've already made their decision on Zach. I think it's going to be a matter of, unless Zach really balls out. Like, Zach's going to have to go totally nuts for me to have him as quarterback 3 or 2 next year. Like, maybe you have, Zach's quarterback 2, but we're going to bring in this veteran like Jacoby Brissett to sit as quarterback 3. And then you do a little swapperoo if Rodgers goes down. I don't know. I don't think you can realistically rely on Zach next year. Blitzkrieg says, do you think they have turf change before next season? Look, I think the Broncos have made 2 grass moves in a year or 2 in the last 2 years. I would 100% make the move to grass. I don't think Bakhtiari comes here without grass. I think Garrett Wilson has already been chirping about grass. I think Aaron Rodgers could be chirping about grass as well. Band says, Michael Carter II and Will McDonald are both likely to play for the Jets today, per Sal Palantonio. All right, I like that. Michael Carter II he popped up on the injury report yesterday. Will McDonald has kind of been a healthy scratch or very limited snap count with our rotation of edge rushers. I would like to see Lawson inactive right now. Cayuga Lake Jet fan says the Jets, the players have meetings every week. Most teams do this. That's what Garrett was talking about. So it's not even a players-only meeting. It was a offensive players-only meeting. So it wasn't defense in there. It wasn't special teams. It was literally just the offensive players saying, how do we get this figured out? Sky's the limit says, you will give it up if you win a Super Bowl. Big if, though. I would give up a first-round pick for a Super Bowl, but I think Davante Adams for a first-round pick is nuts when you have T. Higgins or Mike Evans or Darnell Mooney or Hollywood Brown or any number of the wide receivers that you could draft and have 5-year control over of in the draft. I would not give up a first-round pick for Davante Adams. I will not do it. Not for 2024. I would be very upset with that. Jet Judge comes in and says, Zach is not the problem. The offensive line and the offensive coordinator is, and the drops. How can any quarterback do amazing under these circumstances? Zach is second string and surviving with a terrible supporting cast. I am not saying that. I'm saying we can't do anything about the offensive coordinator because we're stuck with Rodgers. Like it or not, Hackett's going to be here. So that's something you cannot change. Offensive line, we're on our 7th combination of offensive linemen this year, which is a serious problem. Serious problem. And I don't blame Zach for either one of those 2 things. I don't blame Zach entirely for the drops. I probably give it 2/3 issue with wide receivers, 1/3 issue on Zach just trying to piss missile a pass into receivers that he is seeing get open as opposed to anticipating and throwing a ball with touch to an open spot. That is a little bit more of my issue with Zach in terms of drops. But yeah, look, I've seen 3 years from Zach play or 2.5 years of Zach's play, and I can't point to one game and say, wow, Zach balled out. The Chiefs game's the closest thing. Maybe the Tennessee game where it was a bunch of broken plays and we wound up winning. But as far as playing from within an offense, the Chiefs game's the only one. And it was like, you want to see that over and over again. You look at what CJ Stroud's doing with a shit offensive line and a defensive-minded head coach down in Houston. He is balling out. He is absolutely balling out. So you can't tell me that Zach Wilson is not part of this problem after 3 years and nothing to say for it from an offensive standpoint. You cannot have your last efficient offensive touchdown drive come from the fucking Chiefs game and not tell me that Zach Wilson isn't part of this problem. Absolutely ridiculous. Harlan says Joshua Hall should not draft a quarterback in the first round, draft a quarterback later on. Joshua Hall, who the hell are you talking about? Oh. Someone else in the house. Should not draft a quarterback in the first round, draft a quarterback later on. Yes, I would agree with that. I think you have to end up with an additional pick. I don't think you can use our singular first-round pick on a quarterback. I would not do that. So Joshua Hall was the one asking about the quarterback situation. I tend to agree with this. John says the wide receivers can't separate, yet they get rid of Hardman. Hardman was not going to see the field. Hardman was not going to see the field because Gibson outperformed. I would much rather move on from a 1-year wide receiver that you could get a little bit of a trade from. You moved up 1 round. You moved from 7th round up to 6th round with Hardman, and allow a 4-year young player who's played better to get reps. I'm okay with that. As far as separation, there's a bell curve, right? Like, you need good quarterback play to overcome poor separation. So there's like this weird intersecting situation where as you get less separation, you need a better quarterback. And the Jets have a very, very bad quarterback, which means we need to have wide receivers separate. Because there's plenty of receivers right around where Lazard is on his separation chart. But you see a DK Metcalf have Geno Smith, who has better ball placement. You see DeAndre Hopkins. Will Levis has better ball placement. Ryan Tannehill has better ball placement. It's Zach Wilson's placement. Like, Zach Wilson is throwing hospital balls to Garrett Wilson. That's why Garrett Wilson got hurt. Garrett Wilson is getting cracked left, right, and center. And Breece Hall's taking a bunch of shots too. Like, as much as you can't say, oh, it's on the receivers, it's on the offensive line. Like, there are some very critical things that are happening in this game that does fall on Zach. He's not the only problem by any stretch of the imagination, but it is definitely an issue. Mr. Pretzel Kev says, less offseason talk, more touchdowns this year. Dude, we haven't seen an offensive touchdown in so long. So long. I mean, you're talking the Giants game was a 1-play, 50-yard scamper. The Eagles, the game before that, was an allowed run-in on a 1-drive play from Breece Hall because they're trying to save clock. And then I think the Broncos touchdown that we got was a Breece Hall, long run again. So the last sustained touchdown drive we had was week 4 against the Chiefs. What week? We're in week 11 now, aren't we? Nuts. Absolutely nuts. All right, boys and girls. I've done this for an hour. I'm frustrated. You guys know my thoughts. I don't want to give up a first-round pick for Davante Adams, not in 2024. If you can somehow maneuver it where you give up a 3rd-round pick or conditional pick for Davante Adams, I'm on board. I like that. I'm a fan of that. I am just not going to trade the 2024 first when there are so many other options out there in free agency. Now, as far as our poll question goes, we had about 300 people voting it. 55% of you want to trade for Davante Adams, 24% say Mike Evans, 14% say T. Higgins, and then 7% say draft or another free agent. I am very excited to see how the rest of this game goes today. Not rest of this game, the entirety of this game. I'll be back here for the post game. After the game, I'll give you guys my raw emotional thoughts on what I saw, the good, the bad, the ugly. I'll have the Zach Wilson every throw video as well, so we can talk about that. But guys, make sure you hit that like button on the way out. This is Jets Talk signing off. JETS.